St Hilda and her church in Hartlepool. First, St Hilda. To me, the most appropriate way to begin our thoughts on St Hilda and her church in Hartlepool is to look at the window in the south wall of the chancel of St Hilda's church, which depicts exactly that. Here we see St Hilda holding in her left hand her staff of office as abbess of her monastery here in Hartlepool, and in her right hand the church on the headland here, which bears her name. In terms of place, her world was very much ours, the northeast of England, from Lindisfarne or Holy Island in the north to Whitby and York in the south. In terms of time, however, we are centuries apart, 14 in fact, for in 2014-15 we celebrated the 1400th anniversary of her birth in 614. Two windows on the north side of the church give us an insight into the characters of the period. In the left window we see, from left to right, St Hilda, 614 to 680, again holding her staff of office, and a church but of earlier and smaller proportions than that in the chancel window. Christ and St Cuthbert, 634 to 687, holding the head of St Oswald, 604 to 642, who was King of Northumbria from 634 to 642. In the right window, again from left to right, we have St Bede, 672-735, Christ, and St Aidan, 591 to 651. We must begin with Bede, monk, scholar and writer, who, at the joint monastery of Jarrow and Monk Wearmouth, in his History of the English Church and People, tells us virtually all that we know about these northern saints. Comparison of his description of Lindisfarne with the ebb and flow of the tide. This is a place that is twice a day encircled by the waves of the sea, like an island, and twice rejoined to the mainland when its shore becomes exposed again. And the current list of crossing times to the island bears testimony to his accuracy as a writer, and makes the point neatly that we are, indeed, living in the same world. If you have ever wondered why, here in Hartlepool, we have St Hilda's School, but St Hilda's Church, the answer lies with Bede. Because he was writing in Latin, he needed a Latin form of her name, Hilda, in exactly the same as his own name became Beda. Bede describes Hilda as a woman of great energy, who was a skilled administrator and teacher. She gained such a reputation for wisdom that even kings and princes sought her advice, but she also had a concern for ordinary folk. In his words, all who knew her called her mother because of her outstanding devotion and grace. We need to remember at this point that we are thinking about a single church. Henry VIII's split with Rome, which created the Church of England, didn't occur until about 1536. The first Christians, like Jesus himself, lived in Palestine, at the western end of the Mediterranean, which was part of the Roman Empire. Soon Christianity spread through the rest of the Roman Empire which included England, Scotland and Wales, from 43 to 410. After that, Christianity here lapsed until from Rome came the missionaries, Augustine and Paulinus, to the south of England, which we may call the Roman arm, and Patrick, about 430, to Ireland, from where, by 563, an Irish monk, Columba, had founded an abbey at Iona off the west coast of Scotland. This we may call the Celtic arm. By 634, Oswald was king of Northumbria, based at Bamborough Castle. Whilst in exile earlier in his life, he had learned Christianity and their language from the monks of Iona, and now wanted to establish Christianity in his kingdom. At his request, Aidan was sent, and King Oswald gave him Lindisfarne, or Holy Island, as its base. As Aidan had difficulty in speaking English, Oswald, who knew the Irish language from his exile, acted as interpreter when Aidan was preaching. Aidan became Bishop of Lindisfarne, and it was he who spotted Hilda's potential, oversaw her training, and sent her to Hartlepool in 649. He died in the churchyard at Bamborough in 651. What of St Hilda herself? St Hilda was a royal birth, the second daughter of Hereric, the great-nephew of King Edwin of Northumbria, and his wife Bregiswith. Hilda had an elder sister, Hereswith, who had married the king of East Anglia. We don't know where Hilda was born in 614, but after the murder of her father, whilst in exile under the protection of King Cerdic of Elmet near Leeds, it is generally assumed that she was brought up at King Edwin's court in Northumbria. By this time, King Edwin was a widower. As he was seeking to expand his kingdom through marriage, he took as his wife Ethelberga, a princess from Kent, who brought with her as one of her chaplains Paulinus, whom we mentioned earlier. Edwin himself took the momentous step of accepting the Christian faith, and at York, on Easter Day 627, together with his nobles, courtiers, and the 13-year-old Hilda, was baptized. For the next 20 years, until 647, nothing is known about Hilda, but it seems likely that after King Edwin was killed in battle in 633, she went to live with her sister Hereswith in East Anglia. Bede resumes his story at the point where she had decided to join her widowed sister, who had gone to the convent of Chelles in France, and had begun to make preparations for her own journey to France. However, Bishop Aidan, who had heard that Hilda felt called to the monastic life, and himself needed her help in Northumbria, sent urgent messages for her to return to the north, which she did. This was the turning point in her life. Aidan gave her a piece of land on the north bank of the River Wear, though we don't know exactly where. There, Hilda formed a small community, whilst the bishop himself instructed and guided them in the Celtic tradition which he had brought from Iona. Bishop Aidan saw Hilda's gifts, and in about 649 asked her to take on a greater role as abbess of the monastery in Hartlepool, which, since its establishment in 640, had been under the leadership of another lady, Hugh, Heiu, and included both monks and nuns. Bede writes, Bishop Aidan and other devout men who knew her and admired her innate wisdom and love of God often used to visit and advise her. To which my late wife commented, "How amazing to think that Bishop Aidan possibly came to Hartlepool headland from time to time." In 657, at the request of King Oswy, who wanted to have a larger monastery further south, St Hilda founded a new monastery at Whitby, on land given by the king. We heard earlier of the Roman and Celtic branches of Christianity. Before long, there were growing pressures from Rome that the Church in Britain should follow the ways of the Roman rather than the Celtic tradition. This tension had already shown itself in practical terms in the Northumbrian court, where King Oswy and his wife followed different traditions concerning the date of Easter. Whilst one group was celebrating Easter, the other would still be fasting during Lent. To resolve this and other matters, in 664, King Oswy called and chaired a synod at Whitby, which was hosted by Hilda, who was excellently equipped for her role, having been baptized by Paulinus and supported so much by Aidan. After first the Celtic and then the Roman points of view were stated, the king decided that the Roman view should be accepted. Hilda was probably very disappointed with his choice, but being a person of strong faith and integrity, she lived with the decision for the rest of her life. One of Hilda's gifts was her encouragement of creative gifts in people around the community, like Caedmon, a shy man, a cowherd, whom Hilda knew well. He would meet with others at the end of the day over a drink and a song. But when it came to the song, he would always disappear. One night he had a dream in which a man came to him and said, "Caedmon, sing me a song." He was horrified and said, "I can't sing." But the man continued to look at Caedmon and said, "But you sing for me. Sing to me about the wonder of creation." Suddenly, Caedmon began singing. After he woke, he told his boss, and they went to Hilda. So came into being the first Christian song in the English language. Hilda realized that Caedmon had been given a great gift. He came into the community and would turn into song the stories from Scripture that were being told in the town and in villages. Hilda helped to draw out the gifts of the shy and the disadvantaged. During the last 6 years of her life, Hilda suffered from fever, but continued to work until her death on the 17th of November 680, at what was then the advanced age of 66. In her last year, she set up another monastery, 14 miles from Whitby, at Hackness, near Scarborough. We do not know the place of her burial. It is told that Bregusuith, while pregnant with Hilda, had a prophetic dream in which she found that her husband, Hereric, had been taken away. While she searched for him, she found a precious necklace hidden in her garments, which gave off a brilliant light, illuminating the whole land. Commenting on this dream, Bede wrote, "The which dream, without doubt, was truly brought to fulfilment in her daughter of whom we speak, whose life, not only to herself, but to many who would live well, did give examples of the works of light. As my late wife commented, it is interesting that exactly half of St Hilda's life, 614 to 647, 33 years, was spent as part of the secular world, and the other half, 647 to 680, 33 years again, in following her calling as a nun. And we at St Hilda's would like to think that we are doing our best to continue the work of St Hilda in our own generation. Now, her church in Hartlepool. The monastery which Hugh established in 640 on the headland, and to which Hilda came in 649, consisted of small timber buildings where the monks and nuns lived. The most important building, however, would have been the large church built of stone, near which the nuns and monks were buried. Two pieces of evidence support this. One of stones, carved with the person's name to mark each grave, was discovered in 1833 while houses were being built, and is now on display in St Hilda's Church. In 1999, during excavations for the Time Team television programme, the body of a female was discovered in that area. Tests showed that she lived in the 8th century, and so is very likely to have been one of the nuns from St Hilda's monastery. In the following year, her remains were interred in the sanctuary of the church. Hartlepool, meaning the Isle of Hart, as the headland was then known, was a place of prayer and learning that attracted pilgrims from all over Britain and Ireland. The inhabitants spent their time in devotion, writing religious books and spreading their faith throughout the north. This work went on until the 9th century, when the monastery was abandoned during the decline of the Kingdom of Northumbria. In 1066, some 400 years after St Hilda left Hartlepool, came the Norman conquest, when an influx of nobles from France settled here. From this background was Robert de Bruce I, 1070 to 1142, who came north to help control what was a lawless border region. He became very powerful and founded Gisborough Priory in 1119. His son, Robert de Bruce II, married Agnes, the daughter of the Lord of the Manor at Hart, and it is generally believed that St Hilda's was built by their grandson, Robert de Bruce IV, hence the Bruce Chapel and Tomb. A pamphlet produced by the De Bruce Project in Gisborough in 2011 states, "The church contains, in the Bruce Chapel, a tomb traditionally thought to be of the Bruce family, but now thought to be that of another local noble family. This church is certainly worth a visit, either way." The church was probably built in the late 12th or early 13th century. The arch in the south porch is of the Norman type, semicircular with chevron mouldings, but most of the church's architecture is of the early English period. The arches are peaked, thus making it a good example of the transitional type. Because it was feared that the tower was unstable, massive buttresses were incorporated to make it secure. About 1724, because the east end of the church became unsafe, it had to be demolished. A temporary wall was built, giving the church a truncated chancel for the next 200 years. The demolished section was replaced by stages, but mostly during a massive restoration between 1926 and 1932, so as to bring the Bruce tomb back inside the church. At the same time, the Galilee Chapel at the west end of the church was renovated and the western wall and roof added. Between 2000 and 2004, regeneration money became available to Hartlepool Borough Council, and it was felt appropriate that it should be used for a visitor centre on the headland. Eventually, it was decided that the visitor centre should be housed within St Hilda's church, hence the storyboards on the walls. In order to provide some demarcation between the worship and social areas of the church, the screen was moved from the chancel arch to the western end of the nave and reversed. Not only did this manoeuvre achieve its object, but it also gave a magnificently unimpeded view of the full length of the church from the point of the entry at the west end. In order to secure disabled access to the church, the main entrance to the building was moved from the south porch to the two doors in the Galilee Chapel, from which access to the church is gained by a most effective gentle ramp. These modifications, together with improved toilet and servery facilities, and the replacement of the pews by modern individual seats, enable the church to be used in a versatile manner, whether for worship or community purposes. As well as being a fully functioning church with a regular pattern of service and wide range of other activities, such as concerts and children's activities, can be accommodated. The church is open to visitors each week on a regular basis, but access is limited at the moment. Details are given on the church's website. We would like to think that St Hilda would be pleased that her church is being used in this way, and that the significant points of her life continue to be remembered. In 1980, we'd celebrated the 1300th anniversary of St Hilda's death with a series of events including a flower festival and a screening of a programme for BBC One's Songs of Praise. In 2014 to 15, we celebrated the 1400th anniversary of St Hilda's birth with another series of events, including concerts and organ recitals. Each year, St Hilda's life is celebrated by the Church of England on November the 19th, and on the nearest weekend to that day, we have a parish pilgrimage to Whitby, usually visiting the nuns of the Holy Paraclete at Sneaton Castle. As one of my hobbies is amateur radio, at the weekend of the Patronal Festival, for several years, we have run a special event station from the church with the call sign GB5SH. A slide shows the Bishop of Durham, after presiding and preaching at the morning service one year, speaking to an amateur radio station in Malvern. On March the 8th this year, 2020, the Way of St Hilda, a pilgrimage trail linking Hartlepool with Whitby, devised by Hartlepool Borough Council, was launched. Details can be found on the church's website. Again, many of the places associated with St Hilda and her times are very well worth visiting today. Not in the least her church here in Hartlepool.